Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am currently visiting Malta, filming a whole bunch of interesting guns that were put together courtesy of the Association of Maltese Arms Collectors and Shooters. And we figured it would be a real shame to visit the island and not film something that is specifically Maltese. So what we're looking at today is a trio of Maltese flintlock pistols from the 18th century. So just a little bit of background to start off. The Maltese Knights, or as they're properly known, the Order of St. John, was a military Christian religious order that was founded in the year 1080. Think of this as, it served two functions. They were an order of Knights Hospitaller. Their mission was to protect pilgrimage routes and pilgrims on the way to Jerusalem. So this is during the Crusades, and this is also as a practical matter, a good thing for aristocratic families to do with their younger sons. Sons who aren't going to get an inheritance, they need something to do and some place to go, and sending them off into a military religious order was a perfectly suitable solution. Anyway, the Knights were at first based in Palestine, in Jerusalem. They were eventually kicked out of there. They found themselves on the island of Rhodes, where they were eventually, in the 1500s, they were defeated by the Ottoman Empire, and they were actually, much I think to the Ottomans' regret later on, they were allowed to leave with full military honors with all of their ships and their armaments, and they spent about 7 years sailing around the Mediterranean looking for a base until finally in 1530 the Pope granted them the islands of Malta. The main island of Malta itself primarily, and then two other small islands right next door. So in 1530, they arrived in Malta and they started setting up a base. And this would be their home until 1798, when the French under Napoleon came and took control of the islands. So during this period of the 1500s, the 1600s, and the 1700s, the Knights of Malta became a very powerful organization. And what they were largely involved in doing was corsairing, which is kind of a fancy word for legitimized piracy. It was basically a way to wage economic warfare on enemies of the order or enemies of the church, usually the same thing, but not necessarily always. This largely meant the Ottoman Empire. Trading vessels were basically the Order of Malta, the Order of St. John, would sign permits for people to go out and corsair or attack enemy vessels and take their cargo, take the crew and passengers as hostages. And then the order would receive a percentage, typically 10% of whatever profits were taken from the expedition. So because of this, and because of donations from wealthy patrons, the order became really quite wealthy and powerful. And what does a wealthy and powerful order need to do? Well, they're going to need arms. Not just big stuff like naval vessels, but they're also going to need plain old small arms, just like everybody else needs. So they were buying guns somewhat regularly, periodically. The very last order that was actually placed by the order was in 1759, and it was for both muskets and pistols, handguns, and it was placed with a firm out of Saint-Étienne, France, which was then, as it would continue to be for hundreds of years, a major center of European arms manufacture. And what we have here to take a look at today are they ordered two different types of handguns. They ordered short-barreled ones in pairs, and they also ordered long-barreled ones. So let's take a look at those. So in total, about 2,000 of the pistols were purchased as part of this order by the order. It included also a whole bunch of muskets. In fact, it included more muskets than it did pistols, but those are a subject for a different video, and the pistols are cooler anyway. So they were purchased in two different patterns. There's a long one. This is a 300 millimeter or a 12-inch barrel. And there's a slightly shorter one with a 240 millimeter barrel, or about 9.5 inches. The short-barreled ones were actually ordered in pairs. The long-barreled ones were ordered as singles. We don't know for sure if the whole order was actually delivered to the order. The records are still, well, people are still investigating this. But what we do know is today, the short-barreled ones are much more commonly found. Neither are exactly common, but the short-barreled ones are much more commonly found than the long-barreled ones. This is, of course, a single-shot flintlock pistol. These are made to the pattern of the French Model 1873/4 pistols. So this was an easy thing to be produced in Saint-Étienne. The craftsmen there, because this was a standard French military pattern, were very familiar with it. You'll notice on this side we have belt hooks. So these were not carried in holsters. They were carried hooked across belts or sashes. The long-barreled guns have a much longer hook to them. We know that these were ordered for both naval and cavalry applications, but there is still disagreement on whether the pairs were for the Navy or the pairs were for the cavalry, and the same on the long-barreled guns. That's not entirely clear. Looking at them a little closer, we can see a couple distinctive markings. So the long-barreled one here will always be marked with the distinctive Maltese 8-pointed cross over an acceptance mark, which is a crown over LL3. That's a little bit worn on this example, but that is what you'll always find on the long-barreled guns. The short-barreled guns will have the same Maltese cross, but then they'll have a different acceptance mark. And this indicates the acceptance by a different part of the Maltese organization. So this is a crown over JL and a very small V. And then they will also generally have a Maltese cross in the wood, which the long-barreled guns do not. If we look at the lock markings themselves, these will all be marked Girard and Compagnie, in French, Girard and Company. However, the size and the shape and the font of the lettering is going to be different across the board. So here's one example. Here's the long-barreled example. And here's the nicest looking one, which is one of the other short-barreled guns. The reason for this is that Girard actually subcontracted the manufacturing of these guns. So he took the order from the order and then hired other people in Saint-Étienne to actually make the guns for him. So they're all going to be marked with his name, but they were done by individual workshops. If you take these apart, take the locks and the stocks off, you'll find a similar variety of markings under the barrels for the actual barrel makers. Beyond that, the guns are all going to follow the same basic pattern despite being made by different shops. We'll of course have a ramrod for loading, brass fittings as befits a seafaring island nation, even though some of these were for the cavalry. We do have a front sight, although there is no rear sight present on any of these. That front sight just gives you an index point. The belt clip, of course, some more brass, a nice little decorative brass trigger guard, and a brass butt cap. So the order had these guns for about 30 years before the French arrived in the form of Napoleon and his fleet. And the French would conquer the island of Malta, and in the process they would acquire most of these guns. So the ones that were on naval vessels almost certainly fell into French hands as the French took all of the Maltese naval vessels. These pistols were very popular with the French military forces because, as I said, these were originally French pattern pistols. So they were perfectly familiar with the operation, and they fit all of the French accoutrements and everything else. The French would only manage to hold on to these for a very short time because Napoleon's next stop after Malta was a place called Aboukir Bay off the coast of Egypt, where he engaged in a major confrontation with the British fleet and lost. In fact, the British would arrive in Malta in 1800, only 2 years after the French, and the British would end up being the dominant presence on Malta. So the pistols served the Maltese for about 30 years. They then served the French for however long it took to sail from here to Egypt and then be defeated. And they have since dispersed into private collections. So there aren't a whole lot of these left. In particular, the long-barreled ones are extremely rare, probably only something like 5 of them surviving. The short-barreled pairs, well, the short-barreled pistols, originally ordered in pairs, but not typically surviving as matched pairs, those are more common, but we're still talking about really a quite rare gun, maybe 10 times as many. So something like 50 of those probably surviving today. While they are mechanically simple flintlock pistols, I think the history behind them and the unique markings that really distinguish them as Maltese contract guns I think are really pretty cool. So I really appreciate the Maltese collector who put these together and allowed me to put them on film and bring them to you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video as well. Thanks for watching.